Misadventure working in China.
I was teaching English in China, feels like ages ago. I found a really unique job offer, combining my love of the outdoors with conversational English, a job which was much more suited for me rather than teaching in the gray city. I couldn't have been more excited. My boyfriend and I applied and were hired. They would pick us up in the van, drive us into the mountains where we would stay in a cabin. What could go wrong? When we got in the van, the driver was pissed drunk. I was young and stupid and thought I could just bus it next time, so I tried my best not to envision driving off the mountain roads. There were two other foreigners, our new boss and his buddy. Boss and buddy spent the time joking around and laughing with each other in Cantonese. I tried to get my mind off the driver by making small chat with the two other foreigners, who seemed uncomfortable as well. When we reached the little mountain town, we were told that we needed to get passport photos for our ID. We paid, felt scammy, but I shrugged it off. Then I asked to use the washroom, but there wasn't one. I had to walk down the street with my boyfriend until we found one. When we went back to the passport shop, everyone was gone. We panicked a bit and text messaged our boss. He told us that he would be back to get us at 1 a.m. It was 6 p.m. As we stood there on the side of the street, already feeling the cold, one of the guys we had met on the bus ran up. I was so relieved to see him. I asked him where our other new friend was. He had been abandoned as well and had already hopped on a bus to get out of there. My new friend told me that he spoke Cantonese. He said that these guys were bad news, that they had been talking and laughing about their plans for me. I couldn't get him to explain any more than that. He just didn't want to tell me. The problem was, our bags were still in the van. I sent a message saying that we could wait until 1, but I had medication in my bag that I needed to take now, so we needed our bags. Drunk guy shows up. He looked completely bewildered as we grabbed our bags. Our new friend helped us get on the right bus back to the city. He was so awesome. I think I thanked him profusely enough. They kept messaging me for a while, asking what happened, telling me that they still wanted me to work for them. Never messaged my boyfriend. I never responded. I wonder what their plans were, but I don't like to think about it. If that guy hadn't have warned us, we would have stuck around.
The lone gas station.
Ignore the dramatic title. I'm not sure how to title it without being dramatic or giving away the let's not meet part. I live about 20 miles from the city in which I work. I live out in the country, and about a short walking distance from my house is a highway, and on the corner is a 24/7 gas station. Last week, Saturday night, I went by there right before midnight to grab some Cajun peanuts. I see one car parked on the side, which is normal. Usually just a guy working and rarely any customers at this time. Do you ever feel this dread overcome you? Like you know something is wrong? Well, I walk in and I don't see anyone. Nobody behind the counter or in the store. So I take my time and assume that they are in the bathroom or a step to the back of the store. Surely they heard the chime on the door when I came in. I'm feeling weird and uncomfortable, so I wait a minute, even though it seemed like forever, and I call out, "Anyone here?" I wait a minute more and put the peanuts down and walk out the door. I checked the car parked on the side and there wasn't anything troubling. I even glanced on the back side of the store and there was nobody. I'm pretty uncomfortable, so I just call the police. They show up 10 to 15 minutes later, but it really did feel like an hour, and they search the place. They find the cashier dead in the men's bathroom, beaten to death. They called in backup, asked me to recap what I experienced, and then I went home. That ain't even the fucked up part. So I get home and my dog is in the front yard pissing and just staring at me. He is an inside dog, and my front door is cracked open. My heart is racing, so I grab my dog and head back to the gas station to let the police know. They send one of the guys to search my house. Nothing is stolen or out of place, but there was sign of forced entry. So this last week and about 5 hours ago, I get a call from my brother who works for the county sheriff's office. Supposedly, they pulled the camera footage and about 10 minutes before I walked into the store, someone came in, started punching on the cashier, and then dragged him into the bathroom. On the footage, you can see me walk in and look around and call out, and then you can see me walk out and check out the car, walk to my vehicle and make a call. About the same time I'm in the vehicle, the alleged murderer walks out of the bathroom and sneaks out the back door, and before leaving the view of the camera, he takes off in the general direction of my house. Fortunately, my wife was out with some friends watching Beauty and the Beast. Again. But I'm convinced that I missed a murderer at the gas station, and then he broke into my house. This week, I had a new security system installed alongside a new front door, but I'm pretty sure whoever did this is still out there. Edit. I can address some comments. I think it was a coincidence that he broke into my house, if he actually did break into it. It was late at night and there were no vehicles, and since my house is within 200 yards, it was probably just an opportunity. I will address the comment about proof. I've mentioned that my house is so close that if I give the article, it'll essentially be too easy to know where my house is.
Sketchy Detroit cop tries to get me in his car at 2 a.m. for no reason.
I'm 25, female, and an exotic dancer living in the Detroit area. This story takes place on my way home from work one night at 2 a.m. at the gas station near my house about a week ago. My boyfriend had needed to use my car, so he'd drop me off at work and would pick me up, so he was driving. There was a cop car parked right in front of the entrance, but other than that, we were the only customers. My boyfriend parked at the pump furthest from the entrance and I got out to go buy cigs. As I walked in, I immediately almost bumped into a very tall, very buff police officer. He was standing in front of the cashier, who was behind bulletproof glass and spoke no English, and talking loudly, oblivious to the fact that the cashier had no idea what he was saying. I apologized for bumping into him. "It's okay, sweetie. Say, what are you? Like, where are you from? You look mixed." "Guam," I said, annoyed, but still courteous. I'm terrified of police, especially Detroit cops. "Guam? Lots of hookers there, yeah? He laughed. I wouldn't know. I was just a little girl, I mumbled, trying to move past him to the register to buy my smokes. He was blocking my way. Suddenly, he reached an arm out and placed it on the small of my back, and because I was wearing a short coat, he easily wiggled his hand underneath it and my shirt, touching my bare skin. Well, you're not a little girl anymore, eh? He was now pushing me slightly, guiding me back out the door. The way the store was set up, we were only a foot or so from the door. I was panicking a little bit, but because he was a cop, I didn't know how to react. I've been in plenty of similar situations without freezing up, but his authority really fucked with my head. I was so confused. I wasn't sure what he was doing. We exited the store. His empty squad car was parked directly outside the doors. He was leading me towards it, talking loudly. I'm cruising alone tonight. I could jack off if I wanted to. I love riding alone. His voice was echoing loudly throughout the pumps. I was numb, but started dragging my feet a little, realizing how fucked up this really was. Suddenly, I hear a car door slam and my boyfriend yelling my name. The cop's hand dropped away from my back and he beelined for his squad car without saying a word. Because of the way my car was parked behind the pump, the cop had not realized I wasn't alone. My boyfriend had the window cracked because he was smoking a cigarette and he had heard the cop making creepy comments and then spotted me being led to the squad car. He said I looked like a zombie. He had never seen me like that before. It freaked him out so bad, he slammed the car door, called my name, and ran over to me. By the time he got to me, the cop had left and I had snapped out of it. I started crying. A million thoughts went through my head. I was wearing heavy makeup because I'd just left work. Maybe he thought I was a hooker. I hadn't stopped him. He probably thought I wanted whatever he wanted to do to me. I felt ashamed and embarrassed. My boyfriend did his best to console me. He even tried to ask the cashier for help, but he spoke no English and just kept saying, no cops, please." He was probably illegal. I understand. He also had no idea what had just happened. I mean, I was there and I could hardly process it. In the end, we just went home and tried to forget about it. I've been avoiding that gas station and I never go out alone anymore. My heart stops for a second every time I see a Detroit cop behind me while I'm driving. Edit. I forgot to add, when we went back to the gas station together during the day and asked the owner for the security footage after explaining what happened, he claimed that they deleted every 12 hours, meaning it was gone. I think that's bullshit and he just doesn't want the cops involved because he has illegal workers and commits fraud by allowing people to buy alcohol with bridge cards. He kept saying, if it really big deal, you get warrant. He no hurt you. Why you complain? And asked us to leave. A Redditor gave me some advice that made sense, so I'm going to talk to my boyfriend's boss, who is a great guy and also an ex-Detroit cop. Hopefully he will have some idea of the safest way to go about reporting this that won't end with me or my boyfriend having a target on our backs.
The ape man behind the roadblock.
This happened nearly 8 years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was walking with my mother around 10 p.m. It was a summer's evening and we were trying to get some air as it was a scorching day and the house was way too hot. I decided to walk with her down the road, around the roadblock to get onto a nice path. This was along a normally busy road. However, it was quiet at the time. I crossed with her to the other side of the road where the roadblock was. To the side of some cement barriers ahead was a small forest-like area in front of a large property not belonging to the owners. Mind you, it was pitch black and there was only a streetlight about 100 feet away. We cross over and I hear a really odd sound. Red flags went off and I felt my heart sink deep into my chest. "Mom, did you hear that?" She didn't say anything, but I saw the worry and confusion in her eyes. She said, "Turn around, we're going back." What we heard was a deep growl, something short but fierce. It continued a couple times and we quickly turned around. I started running, but she couldn't run due to health issues. I turned around after a short sprint and saw, I kid you not, a large black figure on all fours creep up from behind the barrier we were at seconds prior. I started sweating really bad and almost shit myself. "Mom, what the hell was that? Run, please." She started to speed walk and I watched as the figure got up on 2 legs and jumped into the forest. This thing looked like a man in some sort of gorilla suit. We booked it home and decided to just open the windows for fresh air that night. We never came across anything like that in our area again, but deeper into the mountain area of the city, there was an ape man reportedly masturbating and exposing himself to women who would run on the trail. Gorilla Man, let's not meet ever again.
Starfish Creeper.
When I was 16, I broke up with my high school boyfriend. You know, the one you date from like day 1 of high school and break up with and then get back together off and on for all 4 years. During one of our breakup phases, a guy contacted me online and it seemed like a random encounter and he was into all of the things I happened to be into. It was great. The first red flag should have been that he was about 25 years old, looking to date a 16-year-old, but I was ridiculously naive. We met up a few times over the course of a month and would hang out. And by hang out, I mean he would park his car, I couldn't drive yet, in the Walmart parking lot and talk. At the time, this was kind of fun. Looking back, it's clear he didn't want to be seen in public with a teenager. To absolutely clarify, nothing outside of talking was happening between us. After the first week, he became super clingy, and my friend and I nicknamed him Starfish from the Charlie the Unicorn videos because the starfish would scream, "Starfish really loves you." I also started to avidly avoid him because my creep meter was finally kicking in, and my ex and I were talking again. Unsolicited advice, just stay broken up. While I'm at my ex's place, one of our mutual friends, Cam, calls me and informs me that right after my high school boyfriend and I broke up, Cam and my ex had a gaming sleepover. During this sleepover, Cam took underage sexually suggestive photos of me from my ex's phone and put them online, basically soliciting me for a new boyfriend while my ex slept. The guy he got in touch with was Starfish. Cam then proceeded to tell Starfish everything I liked and how best to approach me. I immediately called Starfish to confront him with this new information, and he immediately admitted it. So, Starfish and Cam, let's not meet again.
Woman and man in the van.
I'm not much of a writer and I'm on mobile, so please forgive the formatting. I've been reading through these stories and remembered something that happened to my sister and I when we were younger. So, for some backstory, my sister and I were born prematurely. We are fraternal twins, and we've always been very small. While I was more physically sickly than my sister, she was born with autism. I think due to these ailments brought upon by our circumstances at birth, my mother was very overprotective of us. We had a rocky start. My biological father was a nutcase, so after my mom escaped with us from him, we moved around a lot. By the time I was 5, I think, we settled down in our own house with a shiny, new dad. Things were great. We lived in a very rural town and all of the neighbors were so friendly. Now, due to my mom's paranoia, she absolutely hammered her fears into her children. We were barely allowed to go into our own backyard, which has a 6-foot-tall chain link fence. When we figured out how to ride bikes some years later, we could only ride about 3 houses down in either direction while she watched from the front lawn. So while we were able to play outside, we never felt free to play, if that makes sense. I guess after so long, my mom knew enough of the neighbors that if they saw us, they'd call her and say, "Your daughters just went past my house." So she let us have a 3-block radius to ride our bikes. It was so liberating. We laughed a lot, ran amok, and we really felt like little rebels. We didn't know Mom had neighborhood eyes watching us everywhere we went. It was getting late one day, close to sunset, when I decided it was time to head home. We were at our 3rd-block limit, and I was afraid of the dark. I think we had to be about 12 years old because we were so small, we looked like we were 8 or 9. We had stopped at a stop sign and we were chatting about nonsense when a white van pulled up. A man and a woman smiled at us, and the woman leaned forward. "Hi girls, we lost our puppy. Could you help us find him? We're so worried about him." My mom's warning surged into my head, and I remember kind of freezing. My sister looked at me, almost in tears about the puppy. Her autism made her an easy target for people, and I was having none of that today. I kind of politely declined and said, "Come on, sister." The people started to yell at us after we pedaled away. My sister was sobbing and pissed off at me, but she didn't go anywhere without me. And we got home and I ushered us inside. I told my mother everything in a shaky voice, and she told us we did well. I don't know if those people were trying to take us or if they were really looking for a lost dog. I don't think this is a scary experience per se, but it's the only thing I can remember and thought I'd share. So, couple in the van, let's not meet again.
The face tattooed drug addict who tried to trick me into helping kidnap his ex-wife.
A few weeks ago, my boyfriend was running late to work, so instead of dropping me off at my work, he dropped me off at the metro station stop next to his work. There's a stop that's only a few minutes walk from campus, so I wasn't too worried about it. As I'm waiting for the train at the stop, a random person thanks me for my service. I'm caught off guard but realize that I had my military backpack on, complete with my last name stitched on. A man, covered in face tattoos and wearing dirty, smelly clothes, overhears and walks over to me as well. "Oh, you're in the military? My wife is too. She's the X position for the Y unit. Actually, you look really familiar. Were you at the holiday party at the racetrack?" The specifics checked out, but I definitely didn't remember a guy with face tattoos showing up to the event. I tell him that I might know her, but it's a big unit. The train comes and I walk on to take my seat. "Smith, Amanda Smith, I knew I recognized you." I turn around and it's Face Tattoo Man. He knows my whole name and decides to sit down next to me on the train. He starts asking me questions about my job and how his wife is doing. He says that she was feeling stressed out about her job and that she was worried she was going to get fired. I thought this was a little weird, considering that she had been fired over a week prior, but maybe he was trying to be polite and not embarrass her. But then he starts asking some strange questions. Where do we go for off-site training? When do we go? When's the next time that I will train her? I realized something was really wrong, so I get off at the next stop and try to get away from this guy. He gets off the train too. "Let's go together. You never answered my questions." I look for my phone to call someone to get me out of this situation, and I realize I left it in my boyfriend's car. I decide to tell him that I got off at the wrong stop and try to get on a different car than him when the next train arrives. He gets off of that car and onto mine at the next stop. He starts threatening me about giving him information about her, so I stand up and start making a scene, saying that I need help. A man intervenes and I get off at the next stop, which is actually my stop. I contact that woman, and it turns out that since the holiday party, he started doing heroin and became violent towards her. She and the kids moved out to an undisclosed location, and he tried abducting them at least once. He had become homeless, so that explains why I didn't recognize him at all. He did recognize me from the party, and he was trying to figure out when she would be around next. She had a restraining and no order contact against him, so she encouraged me to contact the police if this ever happened again. I decided to not take the train anymore and ditch my backpack altogether. Last week, I was working late and decided to walk over by the train stop to get some food. As I'm waiting to cross the crosswalk, I hear, "Amanda, good to see you." I look behind me, and Face Tattoo Guy is standing behind me. "No, no, no. Let's not meet and have dinner together as you try to figure out how to kidnap your wife." I turn and take off sprinting down the busy road to get away. I'm definitely staying away from the whole line. Forever. Too long, didn't read. Took the train to work. My coworker's abusive, addict ex-husband recognizes me and tries to get info from me about her location, and he follows me to work. Then, several weeks later, he finds me again, and I have to run into traffic to get away.
The titty man and me at 16.
To preface this, I'm a 35-year-old woman and I worked at 3 different answering services from ages 16 through my mid-20s. I hope this is okay here. It involved me just over 20 years ago. The titty man, bondsman, and sheriff's deputies. I got my first job at an answering service when I was 16, and I loved it. We answered for about 200 businesses, and there was quite a mix. Same old every day, but different too. I was the baby of the office and so was usually not alone, and my coworkers protected me from the usual office debauchery, drugs, sex, booze, but somehow forgot to mention the titty man to me, so this came as a bit of a shock when he did what he did. I'd been working there for a few weeks and was alone on a Sunday night, answering calls here and there and being bored. The line for a visiting nurse company, home health care, hospice, and rehab lights up. I answer to be greeted with a collect call from the local county jail. I accept the call, thinking that someone might have an elderly parent they can't reach and need a well check or to schedule extra visits because they got locked up. Nope. I'm greeted with, "How big's your tits?" I promptly hung up. He called back several times, and I have to accept the call in case it really is for the reasons listed above. I contact the on-call nurse, and she tells me what I just told you about, and how he does this from time to time. I then proceed to be harassed for about a half an hour when I get a brilliant idea. Of course, Titty Man calls back, and I accept the call. I tell him that I have to put him on hold sometimes so I can answer the phone, but I'll talk to him. He likes this. He starts asking questions, dirty ones, and I answer a few. Then I put him on hold, grab the other headset, and do it. Here's where law enforcement comes into play. I called the bondsman we also answered for and explained my situation. He grabbed his other phone and called his buddy inside the jail, relaying the situation. He's having trouble doing this because he's also listening to me talk dirty to this creep. I was very creative for the titty man, and he ate it up. My bondsman was laughing so hard he was in tears. Since Titty Man was calling from inside the overcrowded jail, they couldn't pinpoint him by just being on a phone. Deputies began shutting down banks of phones one at a time. When the call cut off mid-pervy spew, the officers checked who was on that bank. Lo and behold, there was Titty Man. He was in jail because he was, surprise, making obscene and harassing phone calls. Who'da thunk it? Deputies took him into custody with new charges, and he got another 18 months or so tacked onto his existing sentence. The idiot was fairly short to the door, too, meaning he was close to release without supervision. My story doesn't end here, however. Several years later, I was working at another answering service, and he calls. Same company and everything. My old service had closed. I informed the on-call nurse, same as before, too, and they end up pressing charges on him again. I encountered this creep and his creepy yet hilarious antics at all 3 services for the same company and different ones as well. It's been 20 years since I first encountered the Titty Man, and no longer doing answering service work. But I have a few friends that still do, and the creep is still at it. I hope you got a kick out of my story. Edit. I forgot to mention that he did this on a recorded line, and I told him I was 16 during the conversation. I wonder what the judge thought about that.
tramp almost kidnapped me.
I grew up in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, United Kingdom. I was 12 years old, and let's just say I didn't have the easiest of upbringings. I was smoking, drinking, and staying out late around this time of my life. So I was bunking off school. My mom was at work, and it was late morning time, around 11 a.m. I wanted to buy some cigarettes, but as I was well under the legal age was 16 at the time, I had to hang around outside the shop and ask strangers if they would take my money and purchase them for me. About a mile and a half from my house, there was a little shop called the Spar. It was on a fairly busy road. A row of hedges lined one side, with a gap that led into the field beyond, and houses on the opposite side. So I was standing maybe 10 paces from the shop, waiting for people to walk past so I could ask them to purchase my cigarettes. I usually second-guessed if they would be willing by how they looked. I asked a lady, maybe mid-40s, shoulder-length blonde hair, black business trousers, pink elbow-length jumper, looked like she smoked. She said no. I asked a guy, maybe mid-50s, shaved brown hair. He was wearing blue jeans and a white shirt. He ignored me. So I was getting desperate by this point and decided upon asking anybody that came by. Then I see a rather disheveled-looking man coming up the road towards me, past the row of hedges. He was wearing dirty dark brown suit trousers and a buttoned-up dark brown, but not the same shade of brown, dirty velvet jacket. He had a black bowler kind of hat on, and he kind of limped a little as he walked. As he got closer to me and I was trying to suss out if he looked like the type that would possibly purchase a 12-year-old cigarettes, I noticed that he was probably homeless and possibly in his late 50s, early 60s. But I thought, he probably smokes. I'll ask him. As he approached me, I gave him the usual line. "Excuse me, mate, would you please go into that shop and get some fags for me?" He stopped and thought for a second, then said, "How old are you?" I lied. "I'm 15, almost 16. Then he said, "All right, which ones do you want?" and held out a really dirty hand. I gave him my money and asked him to get me 10 sovereign. I had the exact change. He goes into the shop, and I'm waiting outside excited. I'm finally getting my cigarettes and can go home and chill out before I have to leave the house again to make it look like I've just got home from school. He comes out and gives me 20 sovereign. I am miffed to say the least and say, "But I only gave you enough money for 10. And I start panicking because I don't have any extra money to give him. At this point, he hooks my arm in his, very tightly holding my arm firmly to his side, and starts to walk back towards the hedge-lined road. All the while, he's telling me how I can make up for not having the extra money for the cigarettes. I'm kind of stunned at this point, and my mind is blank. I guess I was in some kind of shock. He leads me through the gap in the hedges and into the field, all the while talking non-stop, still briskly walking with my arm locked in his. He's telling me how I can come to his house and help him fix the roof tiles. I'm still in silent shock. The field is huge, and I can see it leads into more fields and more fields. I can hear the cars behind me getting more distant. I can't see any houses for miles. There's just fields. He's still talking, but I'm not taking in what he is saying. My mind starts to race. I finally realize that something about this isn't quite right, and I have to get away. As he is still walking, still holding my arm, I suddenly and violently pull back with my arms straight. It slides my arm out of his very quickly, and he goes flying forwards and lands in a heap on the floor, and I take one big step backwards. I'm terrified at this point, but still in shock. I can't speak. He's laying on the ground, groaning, holding his leg like he is in a lot of pain. "Why'd you do that for? You really hurt me. Help me up, help me up." He's holding his leg and holding his hand out for me to help him up. I'm frozen, but my mind is racing so fast. I'm looking at this disheveled man right in the eye, laying on the ground, groaning like he is in pain. But something about this situation didn't sit right with me. My gut was telling me to run. Don't help him up. "I brought you those cigarettes, didn't I? I helped you out. Why'd you do this? You've hurt me. Help me up." I take another step backwards, all the while looking into his green eyes. All of a sudden, he stops groaning and asking for me to help him up. He points his finger at me, looking me right in the eye, and says, "You're a smart girl." It was like an electric shock ran through my body, and I turn and run. I don't look back, I just run as fast as I can. When I've gotten off the hedge-lined road and turned into the next road, I slow as I'm out of breath. I start bawling my eyes out and shaking uncontrollably. I keep checking behind me, catch my breath, and don't stop running until I get home. Least to say, I was terrified I'd bump into that man again, and I never tried to buy cigarettes from that shop ever again.
Listed under not good ideas, taking the dark, creepy shortcut.
When I used to tell this story to my shitty friends, they acted as though it wasn't a big deal and I was exaggerating to get attention, so I stopped talking about it. But now, as an adult who has lurked this sub for quite some time, I've realized I'm not alone. It's okay to talk about it if it makes me feel better or gives me closure, regardless of anyone who tells me to stop whining. So here it goes. In the spring of 2006, I was 18 and apparently wildly naive. I lived in a fairly populated city where very few major crimes happened. Most of the time when someone was murdered or missing, it always turned out to be in relation to the people they knew or a drug deal gone bad. Very typical crime, nothing that could be classified as scary or induce parents to keep their children indoors. My boyfriend at the time worked at the gas station / convenience store, about a 20-minute walk away from where I lived at my parents' house. His shifts were from 3 in the afternoon until midnight, and he worked alone. Everyone who's ever worked in a place like that knows that some nights of the week are just slow, no matter how many people live in the area. On nights like that, when he knew the boss man wouldn't be back that evening, he would shoot me a text asking if I was interested in coming down to hang out or study or do whatever it is that I forget I was doing at that age. Since I was completely convinced nothing was going to happen to me, idiot, I would walk down by myself and then head home around 11 when he had to start actually working to close the store. One fateful night, I was walking up from hanging out when a car pulled up to me and someone rolled down their window. Naturally, I stopped walking and leaned down to look in their car and ask them what they needed. Before you call me dumb, you should understand that in the area I lived, this isn't unusual behavior, because 9 times out of 10, it's someone asking directions, and the 1 time out of 10, it's because they thought you were someone they knew. So imagine my shock when I look in the car and the first thing I see is a fucking gun sitting on this guy's passenger seat. sort of half hidden under a coat or sweater. I'd never seen a handgun before. I start to sweat. The second thing I took in was that this guy had to be at least 40 and had a very creepy air about him. In my surprise, I hadn't noticed that he was asking me a question, so I sort of stumbled around my words and said something along the lines of, what? He responded with, "A fine thing like you shouldn't be walking around by yourself, baby. You get in the car, I'll give you a ride." This was said more like a statement than a request. I was still a good 10 minutes from my house, but there was no way I was getting in the car with this guy. I didn't want to piss him off, so in my panicked state, I put on a sort of choked, cheerful voice and told him that it was cool because I only lived right there, and pointed to a house about 10 meters away. He said something like, "That sucks, but I should give him my number so he can call me later." Again, not wanting to piss him off, I quickly gave him my boyfriend's number, thinking I was a genius because he'd drive home, call that number, and get told off by my boyfriend, and by the time he figured anything out, I'd be long gone home. He pulls away and I think I'm in the clear until I see that he drives off in the direction that I need to walk home in. Fuck. Not wanting to risk him seeing me, but wanting to get home ASAP, I make the quick choice to take the creepy dark shortcut behind the high school. Big mistake. He must have seen me dart up the hill before he had driven too far, because by the time I got up there and around the back of the school, I could see his car pulling up too fast for me to get out of sight. Like an idiot, I freeze when his car gets real close to me. He gets out and starts yelling like a crazy person, calling me a lying cunt and asking me why all the pretty girls lie to nice guys like him. How he just wanted to give me a ride and I had to be a bitch about it, and bitch little girls need to be taught some manners. The whole time he was saying this, he was taking off his belt. There was a whole slew of other things he was yelling, but I was trying to block him out and weigh my options. Option 1. Turn around and run into the pitch black field that I knew pretty well, down a giant ditch, up the other side that goes right into a very nice neighborhood full of people letting out their little dogs to pee at that time of night, screaming my head off and hoping someone hears me. Option 2. Run right by him down to the street full of cars and people, but risk him grabbing me on the way by, or if he had his gun on his person, being a crazy fucker and shooting at me. Option 3. Pee myself out of fear right there and hope he thinks I'm gross and crazy and goes away. Option 3 was a really heavy contender for a moment. I can't actually say with full certainty that I chose option 1. I think it just happened on instinct or adrenaline or something. But while he was in the middle of telling me how I needed to be taught a lesson with his dick, I turned around and ran faster than I ever thought I could into the pitch black. I didn't even realize he was chasing after me until I jumped down into the ditch. As I was climbing up the other side, I heard him come falling straight down past me. He must not have seen that there was a drop-off coming, because from the sounds he was making, he was feeling the pain of an unexpected 7-foot drop. Because my luck had been so awesome up to this point, I was only a little surprised when I couldn't climb anymore, because my sweater was caught on a bush or a branch that I couldn't make out very well in the dark. While I was frantically trying to get unstuck, I felt his hand close in around my ankle and try to pull me down. There was no room in front of me to try to pull my leg up out of his grasp, and after a struggle, I got the only actual good idea I'd had all night. I pulled myself up as hard as I could and suddenly let go so that when he pulled me down, not only did I get released from being caught in the bush, I toppled him over, landing really hard on top of him. He had let me go in the process, so I sprung back up and climbed up and out of the ditch and ran to the nearest house. To my great surprise, the woman who answered the door screamed when she opened it. I hadn't noticed on the short run from the ditch to the house, but my shirt was covered in blood. I didn't understand at first because from what I could tell, I only had some scrapes and bruises. I eventually learned that when I landed on top of this guy, I broke his nose in such a way that it fucking exploded blood everywhere. The police were called and he was arrested at the ER later that night while being treated for a broken nose and a fractured wrist. He was eventually, and by eventually I mean after 2 years of who knows what, only sentenced to 3 years for assault and carrying a concealed weapon without a license, but was given 2 years of time served because he had no priors. He was a fucking teacher. He had a son my age. My parents wanted to push for attempted rape, but my cousin, who was a paralegal, gave us a whole bunch of reasons about why it probably wouldn't go through, and that since it would be a charge we would lay separate from the other charges, and the legal fees didn't seem worth it. At the time, I didn't really understand how the system worked, and I just wanted the whole thing to be over. The worst thing was that I was only just 18, and if it had happened a month before, he would have been given so much more time for assaulting a minor. It's been 10 years and I still get nervous when a car drives by me a little too slowly or when someone grabs me from behind. Although now I'm way quicker to just tell someone no. I always carry a can of pepper spray and have taken a few classes on basic self-defense. And when a friend offers to walk me home at night, I always say yes. So, guy that tried to maybe murder and probably rape me, let's not meet. I like my clothes way too much to get them covered in your blood again.
My father was chased by a killer.
This is my father's story. As a child, my father was a paper boy and he would get up very early in the morning to deliver them. My father would always end up with a few extra papers, so at the end of his route, he would offer papers to the other early birds leaving for work and whatnot. On this day, my father offered a man who was sitting in a parked van. The man just stared at my dad and didn't respond, so my dad just went on his way. As my dad was walking away, he heard a car door open and the sound of feet hitting pavement. He turned around and saw the man running after him. My dad was very athletic in his day. He played basketball and baseball, so he took off running. The man chased him for a bit, but my dad knew the neighborhood like the back of his hand and cut through backyards and hopped fences. He eventually lost the man and got home safely. He didn't tell his parents because he figured they would make him quit. A few weeks passed by and 2 local boys went missing and their bodies were found at a campground. They were raped and then shot in the head. The man who committed the awful crime was William J. Wright. When my father saw him in the newspapers, he recognized him as the man who chased him. Here is an article about the murders.
My underwear thief and their return on the anniversary of the first incident.
This was June of 2010. I was 20 and living in a townhouse with my mom and younger sister. I had stayed the night with my boyfriend and I had just gotten home and taken a shower. I went in my room to grab some undies from a basket of clean laundry that I'd personally folded and brought up to my room myself the day before. That's when I noticed the underwear I'd grabbed had the crotch cut out. I thought it was weird, but figured they got caught on something in the dryer. until the next pair was cut too, and the next. All in all, there were 5 pairs with the crotch cut out. I ran downstairs and showed my mom. She was freaked out too, but we were hoping to find a reasonable explanation. We looked in the washer, dryer, and the laundry basket for the missing pieces of underwear. Found nothing, so we decided to file a police report. The cop came, looked at my cut-up underwear, and bagged up a pair to take back to wherever evidence is taken. He also mentioned it looked like the crotches were torn with a pocket knife, maybe, because of the way the fabric was ripped. He did a quick look around the house looking for any signs of forced entry or whatever, and that's when we realized the kitchen window was unlocked and the screen was half popped off. Obviously, he said to keep doors and windows locked and suggested changing locks just in case, but since we couldn't come up with anybody who we suspected, since I hadn't noticed any freaking stalkers, he just took the report and bagged the underwear, and that was that. Until the next June. I came home one afternoon after staying with the same boyfriend, and I think I'd been home for a couple of hours before going into my underwear drawer and noticing one pair on top with the crotch cut out the exact same way as the last year. It was a pair I know I bought after the first incident, and I'd thrown away all the cut pairs from before. Didn't want the reminder. I flipped and called for a cop to come out again. This cop didn't seem to care at all though. Did a bullshit walk around the house, took my report, and that was it. I moved out 2 months later. I was not about to live there next June. We lived in a good neighborhood, but I felt watched or something because how did they always know when I would be in my room? My mom and I suspect her former co-worker's creepy as fuck husband, but never had proof. I only remember my underwear thief like twice a year because it's very unsettling knowing the crotches of my underwear are in some creep's possession, probably to this day, but Let's Not Meet reminded me and I thought it was fitting.
Woman with a crowbar.
This is a story about my mom. She has been living in the same house for about 12 years. It's in a shady neighborhood, lots of gang activity, and sirens can always be heard not far away. I can't count the number of times the convenience store across the street has been robbed since we moved in. But we were never concerned. My mother created an unquestionably comfortable home, and I always felt safe. In 2013, when my father died, she adopted a dog for company, as it was just her living in the house at the time of when this incident occurred. The dog is yappy, sweet as hell, but any sort of noise outside, whether it's a car door slamming or our mailman, she will bark, and bark, and bark, and bark. This can be scary if it catches you off guard, or if it's late at night, but of course it's also reassuring that she is so alert. And that's exactly what happened. My mother told me it was late one night, maybe 2 a.m. She was getting ready for bed. She stays up late watching Investigation Discovery and the like. There are 2 doors that must be open to get inside the house. The front door has a large window and opens into a porch where she keeps her deep freeze. There is a larger metal door after the porch which opens directly into the living room of her house. She locks it every night before she goes to bed. She likes to sleep on the couch in the living room. She claims her bed upstairs hurts her back. All of a sudden, her dog started barking her head off. At first, my mom scolded her, assuming she heard a car pass by or something. But then my mom heard it too. Someone was knocking on the front door. The doors had muffled the sound of the knock. My mom sat there silently contemplating what to do and hoping whoever it was would just go away. But it persisted, as her dog did. Now, my mother wasn't born yesterday. She's a tough old bird and won't take anyone's shit. She opened the metal door and went to the window. Lifting the blinds, she saw a disheveled girl standing on the front step. My mother thought she was perhaps drunk, as she was unsteady on her feet and slurred when she spoke. My mom asked her what she wanted. "Is Danielle here?" the woman asked. "No, there is no one here by that name." My mom responded politely as she dropped the blinds and was about to go back into the house. The woman pounded on the door this time, with force. Lots of force, in fact. My mom thought she'd been kicking it. "Let me in," she screamed. At this point, my mom is irked. She goes back to the front door, lifts the blinds again, and adamantly tells this woman to fuck off, that there is no one here named Danielle. This woman finally left, but it wasn't until the next day that my mom realized the trouble that she could have been in if she had opened the door. Her front yard is surrounded by a short metal fence, about waist high. She gives us hell anytime we forget to close the gate, and when she was retrieving the morning paper, she noticed this woman had left the gate open. Annoyed again, she put on her slippers to go outside to close it. That's when she saw it. Laying on the grass beside our walkway was a crowbar. My mom then understood what force was used to pound on our front door. She had no idea the woman had been holding it. The window itself can see a person on the other side from about the chest up, and it had been dark. Who knows what could have happened if my mother decided to open the door?
I was almost kidnapped on a run.
This happened when I was about 18 years old. I was big into running back then and lived in a town that was a suburb but had big swaths of farmland, as in smallish tomato and strawberry fields, not huge, never-ending wheat fields. I preferred running on the dirt at the edges of these fields because it was a lot easier on my legs than running long distances on concrete or asphalt, and I was usually training for half marathons. 13.1 miles for those of you who aren't insane enough to think running is fun. This particular day, I was planning to run an easy 6 miles. I told my mom and she suggested I do a loop and meet them at the dog park about 3 miles from our house as my halfway point. This is pre-cell phone era, when all the craziest shit went down. But being careful, I took a walkie-talkie my dad always used, and my mom took the other one. Now, the walkie-talkie had a range longer than the ones my brother and I played around with when we were younger, but it definitely did not work 3 miles away, and I honestly had no idea what its exact range was. So I take off on my run. I'm planning to go on the sidewalk for a little bit until I get to the fields. I think it was lettuce or something then, but small, short plants. I'm running in the dirt with the road a few yards to my left. I have to run south and then turn right onto a slightly smaller, less traveled road to get to the dog park. As I'm running on the first dirt part, my parents drive by, and being dorks, they honk and wave and yell at me. I wave and then soon after make my turn onto the smaller road. This one is road, me on flat dirt, small drainage ditch, forever of lettuce field, and then a wall that is the backyard of some houses. I start noticing how quiet this street is and how few cars are passing me by. Then I randomly start thinking to myself, if someone tried to do something to me, I could run to those houses. No, they're so far away. I'd never make it. Then I hear a car, but this one doesn't pass me like all the others. I hear it slow down so that it's behind me, just out of my peripheral vision. My senses go super alert and I immediately realize what a dumbass I was to pick this route because I'm stuck out here with no one to help me and nowhere to hide. The car starts speeding up enough so that it's next to me, and I glance over and see a man, middle age, white, dark hair, totally normal looking, but I get a chill down my spine immediately. He sort of leans over into the passenger seat and says in a super sweet voice, "Hi, where are you going? Do you need a ride?" I am scared and I realize this is not good. Admittedly, nothing has happened yet and he could be totally innocent just wanting to chat, but my intuition is in overdrive telling me I'm not safe. I hop over the ditch thinking at least that will make it harder for his car to follow me if I need to take off across the field to try to make it to those houses in the distance. This pisses him off. He guns it and gets closer to the ditch and in front of where I am, and then he says in a voice I can only describe as bone-chillingly evil, "You know, you shouldn't be out here all alone. Something horrible could happen to you out here, and no one would ever know where to find you." He has put his car in park and is taking off his seatbelt when I remember the walkie-talkie. This piece of crap is all static because I'm too far away, so I immediately turn down the volume and say loudly, "Hey, Dad, yeah, I see your car. I'm over here by this red Buick. Do you see me?" Fake wave to no one. There was no car coming from the direction my parents were, and when I had started talking, there was no one behind us either. But by the grace of the universe, at that exact moment, a car turned onto the road. The guy saw it, looked at me, and sped off so fast he left skid marks. I have never run faster in my life, and I was looking behind me every few seconds and thought he would be waiting for me at every intersection I had to cross. I was shaking. I was so scared and relieved when I got to that goddamn dog park. I told my parents everything and my mom called the cops. They took a statement but said it would just help if something actually happened to someone else. The weird part was, I was having trouble getting my story out. I was so upset, and before I gave a description of the car, the cop asked, "Was it a red Buick?" He wouldn't tell us why, but that just added to my feeling that I just narrowly escaped something awful.
New England hospitality.
I grew up in a small town in northern New England in a house from the 1800s that was once a tavern frequented by coaches on the way to Canada. Our house was the only property at the end of a steep dirt road that snaked into the woods. Our nearest neighbor owned a small farm that sold vegetables, firewood, maple products, and the hay that he grew in the many open fields along the main road. The farmer was in his early 50s and he had a younger brother in his late 30s who operated a small sawmill about a mile from our house. I remember him as being nice, handsome in retrospect, tall and lean with a deep tan and a broad smile. Like anyone in a small town, we got to know of him through chance encounters around town and gossip passed down from friends and acquaintances. Most of the gossip centered around his rapid turnover of girlfriends and the strained relationship he had with his brother, our neighbor. He had a large Airedale Terrier named Maple that was always wandering along the road and patrolling the farm. She escorted me when I walked home from school and joined me when I went exploring in the woods. I was nervous around big dogs, but I loved animals and was flattered that she was so protective of me. He often drove past in his pickup when I was walking home from school or the library. It seemed like each time he idled the truck to say hi, he'd extend a different invitation. Sometimes he'd invite me to come visit and help him plant in his greenhouse. Other times he'd offer to show me the sugar house he shared with his brother. He had a man-made pond behind his house, and beginning in the early summer, he'd remind me that my parents and I could come swim in it any time. I didn't think his behavior was strange at all. I was a sheltered 10-year-old girl and painfully shy, especially around men. The only reason I didn't take him up on any of his invitations was because talking to adults in general made me nervous, trip over my words, and sound amazingly stupid. That summer, the afternoon heat reached a dizzying peak, and I started making the dusty trek to his house to cool off in the pond. I had a hideous lime green Land's End one-piece on that I hid under shorts and a t-shirt until I could change in the privacy of the beech trees by the pond. The first few times I went swimming, I wasn't even aware of him being home. The house was dark and quiet, and I just assumed he was working. After each swim, I had to walk back up a steep hill through tall grass that hid the pond from the road. There was no way to get back without cutting through his backyard. As the summer wore on, he was home more and more and began to block me on the path to give me gifts. Quarts of maple syrup, sunflower seedlings from the greenhouse, etc. I didn't think much of it because he always told me that the gifts were for me to share with my parents. Still, I never told either my mom or dad about him because I technically wasn't supposed to walk that far away from home. One day I stayed at the pond late into the evening. As I was walking back up past the house, he came out from the darkened screened porch that overlooked the pond. He seemed feverish. The whites of his eyes were unusually large and bright. He put his hand on my shoulder and gripped it hard. He said that I looked tired and that I should come inside to have a snack, and then he would drive me home. He tried steering me inside the house. I started fumbling for excuses. I told him that I had to get home before dark or my mother would ground me and I wouldn't be able to swim at the pond anymore. His face darkened, but he relented. He said that at the very least he should drive me home. I was hot and exhausted, and his grip was far too strong to resist as he guided me to the truck. Almost immediately after I climbed into the passenger seat, Maple appeared from nowhere and leapt into the cab. He scolded her and tried shooing her away. That was the first time I had seen him genuinely angry, so much so that the muscles of his jaw roped under his skin. Maple ignored him, sitting on the floor by my feet and resting her head on my lap the whole ride back to the top of my dirt road. That was the last time I went swimming at his pond. One night that October, driving back from a fair with my parents, my dad's cell phone rang. For a while, he didn't say anything at all. Then he began to speak in a low, anxious tone with my mother. I couldn't make out what they were saying from the back seat. I finally wrenched the story from my father after days of prying. The man had died in an accident at the sawmill. His leg had been nearly severed at the thigh, and he bled out. No one had heard his cries for help. It wasn't until several years later that I unearthed the whole truth. When the police came to his house, they found a huge collection of child pornography. To this day, I still wonder if he would have driven me home if Maple hadn't jumped into the front seat of the truck.
My old scheming neighbor.
This story includes a lot of paranoia, and it may be a long shot, but here we go. My family and I lived in a nice house in a relatively friendly town from the time I was 6 until I was 11. The town was generally safe, other than the time some guy tried to lure my sister into his car. From the day we moved in, the neighbors across the street hated my family. We were never quite sure why, but we figured it was because my mom had accidentally parked on their side of the street the first time we visited the house. Regardless, we embarked on a 5-year battle with them that continued back and forth until the day we inevitably moved out. But the story comes from the strange and somewhat creepy / unexplainable things that occurred while we lived across the street from them. The father / husband of the neighbor's household was in his mid-40s. He was bald and gave off kind of a creepy vibe. He would always stare at his teenage daughter, or my mom. For the sake of the story, we'll call him Joe. Joe's father was important to the township for some reason. This meant that Joe pretty much thought he ran my street, neighborhood, and basically anything within a 2-mile radius of his house. So, he did whatever he pleased. This included taking my mom's parking spot, cursing and yelling at her, staring at us, and giving us dirty looks. He accused us of messing with his cars after we lived there for 2 years, but we ignored it. Of course, we hadn't touched his vehicle, but he was willing to do anything to make us move out. About 1.5 years before we eventually did leave the street, things took a turn in our little feud. My mom was the type of person to take things as a joke, so she would constantly make fun of his accusations and insults until he put up cameras. He claimed to the cops in our area that the cameras were to prove that we were, in fact, messing with his cars. The only issue with his story was this: the cameras didn't even face his vehicles, they faced our house, all the way across the street. This meant that none of his cars were even in frame. And to make matters worse, one camera was pointed directly at my window. I was only 10 at the time, so from that point on, my mom made me keep my shades down and the curtain closed. Other neighbors in town told us that they had gone into his house and seen the video footage, which really did point straight toward my window. I still get chills thinking about that. As if the cameras weren't bad enough, there were various points in which my basement would be broken into and holes would be drilled into the pipes. We had doors outside that led to our basement stairs, and no matter how much we locked them, the drilling didn't stop. We eventually had to nail wooden boards to the entrance. A few months before we moved, my mom had come home from the store late one night to see someone jumping from the fence that separated our yard from the street. The guy just stayed in his car and stared at her. To this day, my mom is convinced that all of those things were just tricks Joe was pulling to get us to leave. They worked. Joe, let's not meet again, because quite frankly, you're creepy, even if you didn't hire people to break into my house and basement.
I almost got abducted a month ago.
First of all, let me say that I live in Brazil and we are kind of in a really bad situation. Basically, our healthcare, education, and security are garbage at the moment because of corruption and corporate greed. I am a male, 24 years old, and I am sorry for my English in advance. Last month, after I left my workplace, I got to my bus stop. Everything normal, except my bus was really late. That's very common. So I got on another bus that takes me a little further from my home, and I have to walk a little bit to get there. The bus arrives at my stop, and I proceed to walk to my place when a car speeds over the sidewalk with a guy inside holding a gun to my face. "Get the fuck inside the car," he shouted angrily. Now, with the jump scare, I drop my headphones as I am always listening to music, so I proceed to get near the door and pick up my headphones at the same time. "Hurry, motherfucker, get in the car." He was getting very impatient, and suddenly, while I'm holding the door and trying to open it, I see a blind spot. He cannot see me clearly, so I run like it's the fucking devil behind me in the opposite direction of the car. I hear screeches and a gunshot. I bolt into the first house yard that I see. Luckily, the gate was open, and when I have nowhere left to run, just surrounded by walls, I look behind and see a man running after me. I fall to the floor, covering my head and eyes with my arms, thinking, this is it. I'm gonna get shot in the head. But nothing happens, so I open my eyes and the guy was just a random dude that was near me in the street and had also started running from the car and the gunshot. There were 3 ladies in that house and they helped me get my head back together before I left a couple of minutes later to my place. Safe at last. So, whoever you are and whatever you were going to do to me, please, let's not meet.
The babysitter.
I'm a terrible writer, so please bear with me. I'm just here to see what the people of Reddit think of this situation. I was pretty hesitant to post this in the first place. A little boring backstory. My mother had me at the young age of 19 and was very proactive to ensure that she gave me the best upbringing possible. So, she worked her ass off, had her own apartment, her own car, paid bills on time, and catered to every need I had as an infant until I had to fly the coop. She's pretty amazing, and so is my family. Both my father and mother's side of the family were there whenever my mom needed someone to watch me when she had to go to work, but sometimes not all schedules aligned and had to resort to hiring babysitters. I was told that she posted some flyers in popular places and cafes to get a larger audience in hopes of someone contacting her. And to her surprise, she received some feedback and hired a wonderful girl named Rachel. Sounds pretty casual and anticlimactic to some, including myself. I always ask how I was as a child, some funny stories, memorable moments, etc. I don't know why, I'm just that type of person who loves detail and will ask questions to grasp emotions and depth to any story, especially those I'm interested in. But to my surprise, I found out that the process of finding a babysitter was much more difficult and unsettling, to say the least. I didn't find this out until I was in high school, 3 years ago when I was in my junior year, after a volleyball game I was in. My mother and I were laughing about something when we were leaving the school doors and out to her car to head home for the night, when a lady stopped us. Now, I've seen this lady around my school, usually after hours, to clean and take out the trash. She was a janitor, and I never really thought about her deeply before, until she stopped us that night. It was evident that she had special needs, and I don't mean that in any bad or degrading way. It was clear that she was excited to see me, and it was also clear that my mother was uneasy when she put her arm around my waist. "I know you. I used to babysit you when you were younger. Just a wee baby. I used to see you a couple times a month. We were practically best friends." She even mentioned my name. To my knowledge, I had no idea who this woman was, at least personally. Immediately confused, and before I could say another word, my mom pushed me out the door and hastily walked to her car. She didn't say a word the whole ride home, and I didn't ask any questions. A few days passed, and I brought up the situation to my mom randomly. I could tell she was disturbed at the thought of it, but she ended up sitting me down and telling me the story of when she was looking to hire someone to babysit me. The lady I had met at school that night had contacted my mom regarding her flyer. I guess they went to the same school, which happens to be the school I went to. And since we live in a very small and rural town, she knew where my mother had lived. When my mom respectfully declined, the lady got obsessive with her and I. She would call my mom every day, visit her at work, and even wait outside her house to try to change her mind on hiring her. She would even write letters to my mom and stick them in the mailbox. It got to the point when one day, my mom woke up from a nap to her sitting on the floor in the living room and playing with me as I laughed with glee. She stopped her story there. I assume that she either moved, had a restraining order, or called the cops. Maybe all three. But it really shook her up, and I think anyone can understand why. We don't know how she got in the house, or how long she knew how to get in, or even how long she'd been entering the house. All I know is that after that night, she stared at me while I had volleyball practice. Ever since I graduated high school, I haven't seen her. So, lady, whoever you are, let's not meet.
Pushy grandma really wants my sister and I to get in her truck.
I've never posted on here before. Hopefully everything is correct and I'm not breaking any rules. I'm not terribly good with telling stories about things that happen in my day-to-day life. I tend to keep to myself. This particular story has really affected how I live my life currently. However, I was too scared to bring it up when I was younger. I live in a medium-sized southern town of about 45,000 people. I know all of my neighbors and the people who go to the Kingdom Hall of the Jehovah's Witness 3 doors down. I happen to live on the last street within city limits, and it's a pretty elderly and quiet area. The layout of the street is unique, as well as making a T shape towards the end of the main road. The left side of the T road has the JW's church, and the right side leads to a road leading to town. At the end of this road is a small gravel driveway that leads to underbrush and a couple of abandoned houses. My youngest sister, 7, and I, 12, had decided to take a walk one afternoon through the neighborhood. As we made our way to the stop sign at the end of the T-shaped road, an older woman well into her 60s and possibly early 70s rolls out of the dirt driveway in front of us. I had an odd feeling about this woman. She certainly didn't live in the neighborhood. My brotherly instincts kick in, and I force my youngest sister, despite her protest, to turn around and start marching back home, with me following close behind. The old woman slowly rides behind before finally driving parallel next to us. She rolls down her window and asks directions to some local store or whatnot. I can't really remember where, and I tell her the basic directions. She then proceeds to insist on my sister and I hopping in her truck so she can take us home. I politely tell her, "No, we're on a walk." She doesn't take no for an answer and proceeds to tell us that she is a friend of my grandmother's, to which my sister abruptly blurts out, "You know Mama Phyllis?" She says, "Of course I know her. Yes, Phyllis. We're good friends. Get in the truck." I politely decline again and insist that we really would like to continue our walk. I force my sister to walk lock and step at a pace I know she can barely handle. The old woman begins to yell out her window at us, "Get in the damn truck," adding threats that if we don't, she'll be sure to tell our grandmother how we disobeyed an adult and that we were awful children. As we finally get to the driveway, both my sister and I run as quickly as we can down the driveway and to the front porch, bursting back into the house. My grandmother asks us how our walk was. We lie and say we had a race and that was about it, and we never talked about it again. I actually don't believe my sister remembers the incident, in all honesty. I've never seen that woman or that truck in my neighborhood since that incident, and believe for a fact that my sister and I wouldn't be living if we had jumped into her truck. Anyway, I really am bad at telling life stories, and hopefully this is comprehensible, but even if it isn't, it's good to get that incident off my chest.
Guy staring through my window.
I've been debating on whether or not I should post anything here, but figured I might as well. I'm a really big fan of this page, so I thought maybe I could contribute somehow. So here it goes. Okay, so this one happened when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. We lived in a tiny town in North Carolina. Combined with the city and entire county, we have a roughly 5,000 person population. Now, when I used to live with my parents before I married, we lived 10 minutes from town. Our neighbors are family and they live about an acre away in each direction. We know everyone and everyone knows us. When I was young, I had a particular fear of leaving my curtains up at night. I had to have my windows covered before I could sleep. I was too young to verbalize it at the time, but the concept of waking up with someone looking through my windows terrified me. After this incident, this particular fear of mine has amplified. Anyways, to get to the actual story, we lived pretty much by ourselves. If anyone comes onto our property, we know who they are. So when my father and older brother started finding boot prints that didn't belong to them, we got a little nervous. Living out as far as we did meant that police, fire department, or EMS would take much longer in a bad situation. My father had taught my older brother, sister, and me how to handle guns, even from an early age. At 6, I was fairly proficient with my Daisy BB gun. So, over the course of several days, they started to notice more boot tracks. Stuff was being moved around in the barn. The building door was open one morning, though we couldn't tell if anything was missing or not. It was apparent that someone was snooping around at night. Since I was so young, my parents didn't want to frighten me, but my brother did. He told me that someone was creeping around the yard at night, and one day I would wake up and he'd be in the house. To put it lightly, my brother was an asshole. My brother always made fun of the fact that I would not sleep with my windows uncovered. He told me I needed to face my fears, and eventually, during this time that someone was definitely sneaking around, he convinced me to sleep with my curtains drawn back. I craved his approval more than anything, so I agreed to do so. He said now was the best time to do it, and I believed him. So that night, I left my curtains drawn. It took a long time for me to get to sleep, but eventually it did come. I was always a very light sleeper, and even the slightest gust of wind would wake me up. I would always wake up 4 or 5 times a night. That night, I heard the porch just outside my window creaking. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it had to be my imagination. Then, a shadow passed over the light coming from the lamp outside. I opened my eyes and sat up. A man was standing in the window, hands cupped up to the glass. In the process of running out of my room, I did piss myself. I ran straight for my parents' bedroom. At the same time, the doorknob to the front door started jiggling hard. He was trying to get in. I managed to get into the bedroom and tell my parents what had happened. My dad grabbed a gun and flashlight and headed outside, throwing the door open. Mom locked it behind him before waking up my brother. After nearly a half an hour, my father came back in. His face was sweaty and pale. He sent my brother and I to bed, but we both sat up and listened. My father had found a tarp and blankets set up about a half a mile into the woods, just off the logging trail that had been dug in some 20 years prior. Guy had been there a while. Dad apparently tore the place apart. He had sight of the guy, but had lost him in the end. The police came and took statements from my parents and had a look in the woods, but didn't find anything. They figured he wouldn't be back anytime soon. We never saw him again, and I always sleep with my windows covered. So, creepy ass man spying on a 4-year-old? Let's not meet.
Bum in the backyard.
I'm going to try to make this story short and to the point. When I was growing up, my best friend had a really big backyard. His backyard was actually connected to a wildlife reserve, but separated by a brick wall. All throughout our childhood, we spent many a days and nights in that backyard. This happened when we were probably around 12 to 13. Anyways, being that the backyard was so large, they had these ridiculously bright floodlights. These lights were controlled by a switch in the house, not motion activated, being that they were so bright. The motion activated lights they had installed only reached about halfway down the backyard, which also meant that if something or someone happened to be back at the end of the backyard, you wouldn't be able to see them, and the motion sensor didn't reach a range of that distance. So often late at night before going out, we would flick on the lights just to catch a glimpse of everything before going out and venturing ourselves. On this particular occasion, we were about to take his dog out to throw the ball, even though it was about 9 or 10 at night. So we flick on the lights, and at the very end of his backyard, there is a homeless person who, at the sight of the lights, freezes completely still. We noticed him immediately. We sat there and stared at him for what felt like an hour, but was realistically more like 20 seconds, just sitting there, watching, unsure what the hell to do. The whole time he just stayed frozen. What finally broke this frozen silence was my friend's dog barking, either from sensing our vibes or finally catching on to the intruder. And thank God she did bark, because this sent the man over the wall in literally a second. I think he thought we were gearing up to let her out to attack him, but in reality we were completely shook and as frozen as him. The next day we went out back to investigate and found a broken beer bottle, a pair of disgusting socks, and what looked like blood on top of the wall. We don't know if he cut his hand on the bottle and then smeared it on the wall as he was jumping over, or what happened exactly. We weren't even sure if it was his blood, someone else's, or possibly a poor animal from the nature reserve. Our original thoughts were maybe he was using the pool to clean himself up, but after talking about it more and more, we wonder if he wasn't washing blood off himself, maybe even trying to dispose of evidence, though we are aware that that might be a bit of an assumption. We never ended up telling his parents because we feared that they would somehow not let us hang out as much because of it. I know it isn't all that intense sounding, but when you are part of it, especially at that age, it really plays tricks on your mind. We were scared of his backyard forever after that.
I may have pissed off a crazy guy with a shotgun who then almost killed a lot of people.
This happened in 2003. I was 8 years old at the time, but I remember most of what happened due to the fact that what happened was crazy. I'm also not a writer, so I hope what I write here is coherent enough for you people to understand what happened. It was Labor Day and we went camping to this place in Virginia. My dad invited his friend and his wife. These people are the grandparents of my best friend. I was like most kids who couldn't appreciate nature. Now I am 21 and I still don't get it. There was an arcade/bathroom station in the campground, and I would bike there to play games all day. It was about a 10-second bike ride from our tent, so my dad let me go by myself. The path to the arcade was a gravelly type of hill, with a lot of small rocks. So I try to go up the hill and my back tire loses friction, I guess, and I lose control and the bike fishtails to the right. I panic because I'm only 8 and have no bicycle skills, and I end up crashing into a white van. The right bumper had a huge black scuff mark. I don't see the owner of the car anywhere, so I pick up my bike and evaporate out of there. We were only at the campground for about 3 days. I don't remember which day I hit the car, but it wasn't the last day. On the last day of the trip, we were packing up our stuff in the car to go home. I didn't help at all because I was in the car drawing with my new Crayola Twistables. I remember that they were Twistables and I know exactly what I was drawing. It was butterflies because earlier that week in school they taught us how to draw them. You make a snowman and then you put 2 3s on both sides of the snowman, and that's a butterfly. I'm drawing the butterfly when all of a sudden I hear the loudest noise of all time. Sounded like a firecracker blew up right behind us. I get out of the car and I'm running towards the sound when I see my dad's best friend running full sprint with a bloody stump of a foot. The foot is still attached to the tibia, but it was dangling. He lies down on a picnic table. There is blood everywhere. It was dark red and thick like syrup and had a lot of bubbles. At this point, there is a circle of people surrounding Bob. I hear a crack and look to my left, and I see this huge black guy, fat and has glasses. He cracks his gun in half and 2 slugs or bullets fly out. He turns around and walks towards the white van. He walks right by the black scuff mark, pulls open the door. The only thing that I could see were boxes and boxes of ammunition. He grabs a box out and puts 2 more slugs or bullets in, and he reloads his gun and just stares at everyone. It's pretty selfish, but the only thing I could think of was I hope this isn't my fault. I crashed my bike into this guy's car and now he has shot our friend. It seems like I started this. I remember the black guy yelled to everyone, "Don't ever ask me where I'm from." I don't know if that makes any sense. My dad makes a full-on sprint towards the guy and my mom had to yell, "He has a gun," before my dad got snapped back into his senses. My dad stopped and stared at the shooter, and the shooter stared back. My dad takes off his shirt and goes back to Bob. He takes his shirt and puts it on Bob's bleeding foot. I don't think my dad knew what he was doing. I remember everybody is retching and gagging because of the smell, but nobody is really moving. We are all waiting for something to happen. That's where my memory ends. There were 2 off-duty cops who saw the whole thing and subdued the perp. Bob ended up losing his foot and he got a bunch of money from the bad guy, I think. The bad guy ended up being declared insane. I do remember seeing him in the cop car and the car was rocking back and forth. I'm pretty sure that guy shot Bob for no reason, but maybe it was because I wrecked his bumper.
The first time I went out alone was almost my last.
I grew up in a very safe, very affluent neighborhood. It was unheard of for anyone to lock their cars or houses, and when someone new moved to the neighborhood, it was mere moments before they were welcomed with open arms and open doors. Despite being surrounded by what could be described as one large neighborhood family, my mom was very particular about house rules being followed, one of which was never going out alone. Walking to a friend's house, 3 of us have to go, so 2 could walk home together after dropping you off. It was rare, but occasionally just 2 of us would be able to sneak out from under her watchful eye and run to the corner store a few blocks down for some candy or soda. One sweltering day during the summer I turned 9, I found myself home alone and restless. I decided to take my sister's cool new 10-speed for a spin around the block a few times. Now, even though I was tall for my age, the bike was still a few inches too big for me. I decided that didn't matter, jumped on, and started pedaling. My first lap around the neighborhood went off without a hitch. Birds were chirping, sun was shining, and the wind blowing through my curled hair felt wonderful. Second lap around the block, I passed an older, unfamiliar car parked on the side of the road, and the sun reflecting off the huge scrape down the side temporarily shocked my vision into bright blue stripes, which I furiously tried to blink away. The third lap, I saw the car pull off the side of the road heading towards me, and a tiny pit of unease began to grow in my stomach as the driver slowed when he passed me. I chalked it up to being scared of getting caught out alone and continued on my way. I picked up speed as I rounded the corner towards my house and decided to go for one more time around the block, but make it quick so I'd beat my mom home and avoid the trouble I knew I'd be in if she caught me out alone. I hit the bottom of the hill next to our house with some speed and started to climb to the top, slowing more and more the closer I got. By the time I reached the top of the hill, I had to stop and catch my breath, teetering the too tall bike at my hip. As I struggled to catch my breath, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My arms locked on the handlebars and every inch of my body froze. I had been caught. I just knew it. I heard a car creeping up behind me and it just had to be my mom. But it wasn't. When relief should have washed over me, the unknown dread only deepened, further stiffening my still frozen limbs. I turned to see the same old car, with the same blinding scratch down the side, slowing down right next to me. The man stopped the car right next to my bike on the wrong side of the street, and through his open driver door started to ask me if I had seen a stray dog running about, because his had come off the leash and run off. I froze. This cliche question is the one they warned us about in school, the one every kidnapper supposedly uses. I decided if I answered him firmly and rode my bike away that he would know his plan wouldn't work on me. Plus, he might just really be looking for his dog. This was my plan. My terrified body betrayed that plan, and a trembling "no" is all I could manage. As I fumbled my feet to the pedals of this too big bike, his car door flew open and out he lunged. "No," I said again as I wobbled my way past his open car door, his hand brushing the back of my shirt and knocking my back tire as I pedaled as fast as I could the 50 feet to the next driveway I saw. I pedaled, legs burning, up the drive, running my front tire so hard into the neighbor's front step that it bent the wheel. My body catapulted over the handlebars, and I burst through my neighbor's front door. "Edie, Edie, Edie, help!" My neighbor was not home. I ran into the kitchen, still calling in hopes I was wrong. "Edie!" "What are you doing?" A man's voice behind me, and I froze, hearing my heartbeat in my eyes, feeling the blood pumping through my veins, knowing that this was it. I slowly turned around, not knowing what else to do, and there stood my neighbor's son, home from college. I dissolved into tears, gulping out what happened. He tossed the bent bike into the back of his truck and drove me around the corner to the safety of my home. My mom was home and had the look of death in her eyes until she saw my tear-streaked face. The police were called. The neighbors were called. The car had been spotted frantically circling the block a few minutes following our encounter, but he was gone by the time police arrived. To this day, 20 years later, I still have a hard time riding my bike alone. I still get chills when cars slow down next to me. I still wonder if the next girl was as lucky as I.
Do you want a lift?
This is hopefully not breaking the rules, as it happens part and parcel between both me and a friend on the same night. Anyway, I'll get into it. This was the late 90s, and me and a friend were over at another friend's house, both around the age of 17 to 18. At around midnight, we both set off home, and we typically walked everywhere. Neither of us drove, so it was really our only option. We walked part of the way back together and then split off in our separate directions. He lived out in the country, and the walk back to his house was a long and pretty vacant one. A long stretch of main road past a cemetery, followed by an almost pitch black walk down a 1-mile road, which led to his village. His house was the second house of the village, so after that trek, he'd be home. After splitting up, it took about 10 minutes before I got a call from him. He said a guy had pulled up next to him in a car and said, "Hey, do you want a lift?" His initial reaction was of confusion. He didn't know this guy, but also, his car was full of kids. 4 kids, ranging from the age of 5 to 14. He said he told him that he was fine, and the guy's face just changed, and he shouted, "Yeah, well, you didn't fucking look like you needed one." At that point, he'd sped off. As he was explaining this, he says, "Oh fuck, he's here again." I immediately turn on heel and start walking back. I partly hear the conversation on the phone. The guy pulls up alongside him and says, "Do you want a fucking lift now?" My friend, again, responds with, "No." Then, possibly the weirdest point, the guy says, "Are you a hermaphrodite?" My friend, confused, just said, "What?" To which the guy responded, "Do you have both male and female organs?" To which my friend simply responded, "No." And then the guy took off in his car again. At this point, I'm racing to catch up with where he'd got to. He was just past the cemetery on the long main road, before he'd got to the point where he'd turn off onto the mile of dark road. On catching up with him, he was visibly freaked out. He said the weirdest part is that the kids in the car just seemed unfazed by it, like this guy just does this kind of thing and they're used to it. They weren't laughing. They weren't even really paying attention. It was all just so bizarre. We started walking together and got to the mile of dark road. It's not a nice place to walk at the best of times, and the previous events just made us both more nervous, but we pressed on. About halfway down the path, we hear a car coming up from behind us. It's the guy again. He's absolutely racing down the road and comes to a screeching halt next to us. Again, he winds the window down. I clock the guy and he looks like the most typical early 30s dad of that time. Bleach blonde Eminem style hair, football top. Basically, you wouldn't have looked twice at him in the street in that particular era. He eyes me up and says, "Who the fuck's this?" Before either of us can say a word, he screams, "Do you want to fucking fight?" And again, before even answering that question, he takes off again, speeding down the road into the village where my friend lives. We now had to walk directly toward where he'd gone, so we sprint it, knowing his house isn't so far away. We rush into his house and stake out his bedroom window, which looks out over the only road leading out of the village. No car left in the hour we sat there. This guy must live in his village, we concluded. I stayed at his that night, and early next morning we went looking for the car. His village is made up of 4 separate cul-de-sacs, and we could see no sign of the vehicle. Whether it was parked in a garage or not, who knows, but it all started to feel like an episode of The Twilight Zone. So, weird, angry, child convoying football hooligan. Let's never meet again.